Do you want to see a Republican where you can visually see he knows he's being dishonest and thus kind of panics, doesn't know what to do, but gives the most absurd answers repeatedly, over and over again? That's what repeatedly means. You know that. This is Republican Senator Tim Scott, who is on the short list, I think, to be Trump's vice presidential running mate. And I've not really known him enough earlier on to know if this is true or not. But what I hear from people is that a few years ago, even if you disagreed with him a lot, he was sort of respected in lots of circles. Just sort of, all right, he's a Republican, but has some respect. Again, I can't personally speak to that. But what I can speak to is any respect he did have has gone down the drains because of his service of Trump and the bootlicking, the booty kissing, whatever you want to call it, all right? However vulgar you want to get in the series of descriptions for how he's served Trump. And here he gets asked first about violent crime. We'll go to some other things, him getting asked about the election, all that. And he perpetuates a talking point that just flies in the face of this thing we like to call reality.
The latest stats on violent crime and on the murder rate, they're actually down this past year. But let me get back to my question about the Supreme Court's decision.
Well, let's take a look at let's take a look at those crime rates. We've seen over 4,000 shootings just in the city of Chicago. We've seen a spike in violent crime. It's nice to see something plateau, but the fact of the matter is simple. Under Joe Biden, neighborhoods like the ones I grew up in have never been ravaged. Grandmothers,
but back
like
to
the one that raised me, are trapped in their houses from the time the sun goes down until it comes up again.
So to my question, though, on bump stocks.
So then we'll get to something pretty bonkers on bump stocks here in a second. But I try to let y'all have a little window into my mind on some of these things. And so I want you to know, I don't get it either. Okay, if you're feeling like, Luke, I don't get how to process that when he's just lying. I don't either, okay? I'm confused. I'm angry. How do we deal with people who are so willing to ignore facts in service of this one orange man, Donald Trump? And yes, CNN reports violent crime dropped by more than 15% in the United States during the first 3 months of 2024. But remember, violent crime was already lower now than it was any time under Trump, near more than 50-year lows, had dropped so rapidly under President Joe Biden that, as I've been saying, some people don't even know how to process it. It's just crazy how fast violent crime has dropped. And crime across the board is back down to pre-pandemic levels. So if that happens, one of the things that I've gone through a lot on the bonus show, you can get access to that by clicking the join button below, is in normal political times when sort of everyone's getting at least the same-ish version of the facts, right? And then opinions wrapped around them, but facts delivered as the core part of a lot of news. Biden would have a super high approval rating. Seeing the economic recovery he's seen and the plummet in crime, those two issues usually are huge for people. Normally that would help a president a lot because there would be this narrative, right? You have the facts and then the narrative about the facts. And if the narrative is at least representative of the facts, then that's a better situation for what it means about people's understanding of those facts. So the narrative would have started to have been, like we've seen with past popular presidents, the president's doing a good job because things are going back in the right direction after this crisis. But because right-wing media is determined, no matter the facts, to have the same narrative, there's all these people out there who just don't know what's actually happening in the world. And one of the things that's happening in the world is in the United States, crime is plummeting under President Biden. Now, where is Tim Scott getting this talking point from? There was a period of time before Biden came into office, because of the pandemic-related conditions and Trump's mishandling of them, in 2020, when this massive spike in crime happened. Largest spike in homicide rates, if I'm not mistaken, in American history. And that happened in 2020. Then Biden has to take over. Crises on all fronts, as I've said so many times now. One of the crises was that spike in crime. So the elevated crime levels that was happening. So Biden had to take over. Then they blame him for that, as we saw with the economy. The economy collapses. Biden takes over. It's his fault now. And inflation's his fault. Everything's his fault. Crime's his fault. I stubbed my toe. Biden's fault. And they didn't ever take note of the fact that, in part, not totally, but in part because of his policies, crime has plummeted. One of those policies is the largest federal investment in public safety, violence reduction, and law enforcement in American history. Largest federal investment. But they're defunding the police. Not at the federal level, baby. Not what Biden's responsible for. So just lying about everything. Lying about Biden's defund the police policy, which he's doing the opposite. Lying about where crime levels are currently at. Lying about where they've been at. Lying by ignoring the fact that they've been plummeting. It's just lies on top of lies on top of lies. Then we talked about the Supreme Court decision that overturned a law that allowed for the banning of bump stocks, which gives you the ability to essentially turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon. And so those were prevented. Now they can no longer be prevented by the federal government because of the Supreme Court decision. Wacky stuff. Well, Tim Scott previously said he was for banning bump stocks. Now he has a different story.
But to my question, though, on bump stocks, would you now favor a Congress acting to ban bump stocks? You had said after that shooting in Las Vegas that if the vote came up, it would sail through Congress. So are you in favor of that ban right now?
Well, I'm strongly in support of the Second Amendment, but what we're going to do in the party, and
I asked about the ban on bump stocks, not the Second Amendment.
We're going to focus on the priorities of the American people. And what the priorities of the American people are today is to focus on closing our southern border. Under Donald Trump, we had a precipitous drop in illegal border crossings. Under Donald Trump.
First of all, the beginning of that response was ridiculous. So you previously said you wanted to ban bump stocks after this horrific shooting. Was that just a political statement? Is that what we're learning now, Tim Scott? You don't actually care about acting to prevent gun violence? The very gun violence, when you reference shootings, the very gun violence that you were exploiting to try to attack Biden while ignoring the broader data? Surely you want to do that, Tim Scott. And he goes, well, I'm supportive of the Second Amendment. What? That's not the question, sir. And then he says, because we should be talking about closing the border. Well, you can always do that about any issue, can't you, Tim? You can ignore certain pressing issues by saying we should really focus on that. That's a little dishonest. And also, it's the Republican Party obstructing solutions on the border, as has been extensively discussed for overtly political reasons. You also have this question.
So let me ask you about one of the specific policy ideas he floated while he was in Washington. He floated the idea of raising tariffs high enough to be able to eliminate all of the income that comes in from income taxes. Is that, I mean, by some calculations, that's a 70% across the board tax on everything imported in the country. Some other estimates, it's nearly 100%. Would you favor a policy like that, replacing the income tax with a massive new tariffs on everything coming into the country?
Well, John, I wasn't in that House meeting. I was in the Senate meeting. But what I can tell you spoke about during the time of the Senate is actually exempting taxation on tips. The working class coalition that is now supporting Donald Trump is supporting Donald Trump because they know, looking back over his 4 years, they were better off under Donald Trump.
So I say again, Donald Trump inherited a solid economy that was projected to do pretty well. It did a little bit worse than that, as I've shown you the visuals on before. And so it sort of slowed down, but that's all right. It was still doing okay. So yay, he didn't destroy immediately the second he got into office what was projected to be a steady economy after the recovery that Obama had to oversee after the disaster under Bush. And then Trump's faced with this economic disaster and he wildly mismanages it and everything collapses and then Biden has to take over. So again, that's ignored. Things were so good 4 years ago. Not so much. But the annoying thing is people are being convinced of this. People really are forgetting the pandemic altogether, and it's scary. And the reason you shouldn't forget it, well, it's because it was a very significant event. But also the reason they want you to omit that from your memory about Trump's presidency is because it allows you to forget about the worst of his leadership or lack thereof. And also it makes you forget why certain conditions have been so bad under Biden, which were pandemic related. So then you give less credit to Biden for his leadership, given your omission of that part of either of those presidents' record. Then you have Tim Scott getting asked about the election.
Okay, Senator, the day before that violent mob attacked the Capitol, you put out a statement explaining your decision to certify Joe Biden's election victory. Do you stand by that? You were not one of those that challenged the results. You voted to certify Biden's election victory. Do you stand by that?
Certainly, I will stand by that decision and the next decision to certify the fact that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. November 5th, the day of reckoning, is coming. The early ballots go out in places like North Carolina starting in September. We're going to focus on making sure that we use every tool in the toolkit to make sure that this election results are clear and profound, and that the American people get 4 more years of low unemployment, low inflation, high enthusiasm, and a president respected and sometimes feared on the global stage.
So think about how disturbing that is. Oh, him saying, again, see my previous points about his everything was great under Trump rhetoric, but imagine saying the Constitution's clear. Meaning, he's being vague like he's being with everything, but I think he's saying, as he previously did, that Pence did the right thing. Think about that. He's willing to acknowledge Pence did the correct thing, meaning Trump wanted something unconstitutional to happen, which is what he was pressuring Pence to do. Then do you remember, Tim Scott, you want so badly to be Trump's vice president? Do you know what happened to his last vice president? Trump's fans were chanting, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. They wanted to hang him because he dared to support, for a second, the Constitution. And Trump to this day says that Pence should have violated the Constitution in his name. Tim Scott wants to be in that role next time. And it's shameful that he would acknowledge now both that Pence did the right thing while still supporting Trump. Pretty scary moment where even those who used to have an all right reputation are willing to torch it in service of Trump. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments. And if you want to get the extra episode of the show, as I said earlier, you can do so by clicking that join button below.